Everybody, and welcome to the last CareerFoundry event of this year. Unbelievable, though that may seem, but it is the last event, and I'm very happy to welcome back Maureen once again. And as you may know, Maureen is a CareerFoundry student, so Maureen did the UX design program here at CareerFoundry, but Maureen is also now a senior product designer at Zalando. And this time we thought at the end of the year, let's look to 2023. So we're going to be looking at UX design trends to watch next year. So for everybody joining on Big Marker, and I assume everyone's interested in the program, but also next year, just drop your name on the right-hand side, maybe why you're interested in UX design, and also where you're joining from, so we get a super international crowd. And it's great to see everybody joining. So yeah, just write your name. Before we kick off, I'm William. I'm the events and communications lead here at CareerFoundry. And CareerFoundry is the online school for your career change into tech. So we've got lots of career change programs. They also come with a job guarantee. So if you don't get a job after 6 months, you get your money back and you get full support from a mentor and a tutor. I haven't really got much more to say. We wanted this to be interactive as possible. So do drop all your questions in the public chat on the right-hand side. Also, we're streaming on YouTube and LinkedIn. If anyone's got any questions, just drop them there. And we're also going to be having a live Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions for Maureen or anything about CareerFoundry's programs, do ask them at the live Q&A at the end. And one last thing, Maureen also has a fantastic Instagram account, which everybody should check out. It's called UX Collection, and there's lots of fantastic content over there. And that's about it. Maureen, I think I'm going to disappear into the background. I'm going to hand it over to you. And thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you so much. And yes, this is a very exciting webinar, or a topic that I'm very excited about to end the year with. We're going to talk about 7 UX trends to watch in 2023, but hopefully also in the years to come. So it's more like what the future of UX could look like. And I'm going to jump right into the first trend, because I know that usually the audience also has really good questions, so that we can also leave some time in the end to answer some of your questions. If you see me looking at the other direction, it's because that's where I have my notes. So sometimes I look over. So the first trend is, of course, one that we've had a lot of talk with already in the field in the past months, as we had more and more AI tools rolling out this year, and that is an AI takeover, ? Will AI take over our jobs? So in the past months, in the past year, we have seen already some AI tools that can already help or work nowadays. So tools that we can already apply in our daily work as designers. For example, tools that generate text to image, and DALL-E is a good example of that. So you give a prompt, and based on that prompt, you will get a visual in a certain style. But we also have AI tools that focus on text generation. So if you want to create copy, then these AI tools can help you with that. And I actually got off the wait list for the Notion AI tool just before the webinar started. So I'm very excited to try that out. And these are 2 good examples of how AI can already make our jobs easier today. So there's a lot of enhancement, automation, but with that also comes the question, will AI at some point completely take over our jobs? Will our jobs no longer exist because we have an AI that can create wireframes and do user research and create content? I understand these worries, but personally, I'm very excited to see where AI will help us. I don't think it will take over our jobs, because in the end, UX design is about understanding the human psyche. And we have a lot of different tools to do that. But there is one tool that we have and that an AI does not have yet, and that is empathy. And that's where I think even if AI tools can really help our job, there are still a lot of things that are very unique to the human experience and that can really be understood through humans. And that's why I think that AI will not really take over our jobs, but it is good to think about what impact does AI have in the future. And I can definitely imagine that these tools that we see here, that they will be even more used, especially also in terms of copy and content. But it's also very good to think about what are the skills that you can start developing now where AI might not be so strong yet. So if you're worried about AI taking over your skills, I think you should not have a critical look at the AI, but you should have a critical look at your own skill set and what are the skills, especially soft skills, that you can develop to strengthen your position as a designer. So that's the first thing. I'm very excited to see in the next year what other tools will come up. I've already used AI tools that help me transcribe user interviews, automate or autocomplete emails. So there are already little things happening, and I'm very excited to see how far we will take this. The second trend that I want to discuss is something that isn't really a trend in some parts of the world anymore, especially in Asia. This is already standard, but you see that like in the West, we're slowly starting to look at this, and that is what's called a super app. Now, a super app is an app that combines multiple products and services within one platform, and that also oftentimes have their own payment system. So what we see nowadays is that we have a lot of apps that have very specific use cases. For example, food delivery or online banking or messaging or your payment apps like PayPal. But how would it look like if all of these different services exist in one app? And that is something that, as I said, is already a thing in Asia. You have apps like Grab, for example, that offer these different services that have their own payment system. And that comes with a big benefit and at the same time also a big challenge. The benefit is for the super app company itself, for the business, they of course offer an all-round service to their customers. So they really take their customers into their ecosystem. That can also be a not maybe a hurdle, but can be challenging for customers because they can grow very dependent on just one platform. And what does that mean? What are the implications of that? So I personally find that something very excited to think about. Like, what does it mean if you have a super app? Is it always beneficial for the customer, or is it mostly beneficial for the business? In terms of what that means for us as UX designers and product designers, as you can imagine, designing a super app comes with a lot of different use cases, comes with a very high degree of personalization because customers can choose which services work for them. They can kind of mix and match their own app to their own needs. And with that also comes the question, how are we going to design these personalized experiences, and how can we design in a way that is consistent and that feels like one coherent experience across all these different services? I personally don't have any experience with that. I have never worked on something that comes closely to a super app, but knowing how challenging it might be to just design for one service and for one use case or for just a few use cases, I can imagine that if you have to keep this whole holistic experience in mind, that can be quite a challenge, but also an exciting challenge for UX designers. And that's why I think even when super apps are maybe also not something that gets established in the West, it is interesting to look at it out of the eyes of a designer and think about what are the important things to keep in mind if you are designing an app that has these many services and that has these many use cases. And I downloaded some of the apps myself to have a peek inside. Unfortunately, I can't use them in my region, but it was already very interesting for me to see how they, for example, create a homepage where you get introduced to all these different services, and to see how they already try to personalize that even when you have not used anything yet, if they already give you suggestions. So I think that is something that you can apply to whatever new development comes, even when it is something that does not directly affect your work or your life or your region. I think it's always good to have a look into these new products and technologies so that you can also better understand how they are built. And asking yourself these questions can actually help you in your work as a UX designer. So the next trend that I want to discuss is one that I personally am very excited about, and that is content design and UX writing. Now, this is something that, especially in my current situation at work right now, I realized exactly how important this is. That can also be dependent on the project that I'm particularly working on, but I've also noticed this in the past years, exactly how important content and UX writing has become. There is a rise of content designers, of UX writers. That is something that I've seen in the past few years. When I was just working as a UX designer, I had never heard of a UX writer. I knew that there were copywriters, but I did not know that there were also UX writers. And that is something that I've been more in contact with in the past years. And I believe that it will be something that will only grow even more in the years to come. So let's talk a bit about this. As a disclaimer, I'm not a content designer. I'm also not a UX writer. So I might not have the best explanation, but I will try my best to explain what these different things are. So first of all, UX Writing Hub is a website that gives a lot of resources around UX writing, as the name says, describes content design as thinking about the design behind the content with a focus on how to serve the audience the information they need when they need it. So when you read that definition, you might think, is that not the same thing as information architecture? Is content design not just information architecture? But if you already work as a designer, you probably already noticed how difficult it is to create proper designs if you don't know what the content will be. So in the beginning of my career, I worked a lot with placeholder texts, with placeholder imagery. And the challenge with that is that you never really know how a design would work in reality, because you are just coming up with the copy. You don't know how long the text could be. You don't know what images come. You don't know how they relate to each other and the different elements on the page. And that is why content is so important, and why it is so important that we have content designers and that we have UX writers that can provide us with strategies on what actual content will come into your designs. So if you think about this content design, the way that I think about it is I work at Zalando. That's a online platform for fashion. So we sell fashion items, shoes, clothes, accessories. And their content is very important because that's a good tool for us to offer personalized experiences. So we're thinking a lot about what kind of marketing campaigns do we want to show on the homepage? What can we do to make the homepage feel more personalized? What kind of content can we offer you that inspires you? And even when I'm not the person that is writing the text or making the images, it is really helpful for me to have that understanding, because I can adjust my designs, my wireframes, my concepts on that. So that is in a nutshell a bit of what content design is, but UX writing is not the same thing as content design. When you think about UX writing, you might think a word is a word, right? What does it matter? But think about a tooltip in Figma. Think about the words that you have in a navigation, in a menu. Think about a error message that is confusing. All of these things, how small as they might seem, they have a big impact on the user experience. If you cannot find something that you're looking for because the labels in the navigation are too confusing, or if you accidentally delete something because you don't understand the instructions, then that has a big impact on how you perceive a product. And these are exactly the things that UX writers can help with. So there is this thing that's called microcopy, and microcopy focus on things like labels, on inputs for input fields, for CTA buttons. So all of these things that you might think are just small things, but actually make a big difference in the whole user experience. Now, as you hopefully can already tell by how I'm explaining this is so worthwhile for us to have to work together with content designers and to work together with UX writers, because if we already know what kind of content is coming and if we already know what kind of words are coming, that can also help us shape our wireframes. So personally, I found that working in collaboration with a content designer or with a UX writer in early stages of the concept really helps. So in my previous experiences and other jobs, we oftentimes would make the whole concepts, all the wireframes are done, and then in the end, someone is going to look over it and fill that with the actual text and with the actual imagery. But if you do that in parallel up front, it will make the work way faster, way easier, and you can also adjust your designs in a better way. So on the right, I have added two examples that I encourage you to look at yourself to get a little taste of what copy can really do and what content can really do. So if you compare the homepage of Airbnb, the landing page of Airbnb, which you will see on top, with the Google travel site, you will see that those are two websites that have similar goals, namely helping you to book an accommodation, but the copy that they use is completely different. So whereas with Airbnb, they use interesting categories like design houses or wooden cabins, and Google Travel is way more utilitarian. So it's very much about when do you want to find your hotel, where do you want to find it, and what price. And so you can already see how with two use cases, just through the content that you offer, the pictures, the labels, the words, you can create two different kind of experiences. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend you look into these different things just to understand what words can really do for you. And that's what I mean with the title also. What is UX without content, right? We can create the nicest wireframes, but if in the end our designs are filled with images that are not engaging or with boring text, then it doesn't matter how pretty our wireframes are or how well thought out our navigation is, because people will still not want to interact with the app or with the website. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin. So before I talked more about tools and approaches and the different roles that are coming up in our industry. And talking about these things, you will almost forget, why are we all doing this? Where are we doing this also? And there is a lot of talk about user-centric design, and we have to design with the user in mind, and we have to design customer-centric with the customer in mind. But it's very easy to forget where all of this happens, namely on our planet. And it's also very easy to forget the impact that we as designers have on our planet, especially when you're working digitally. You might think that your work has no impact on the environment, but the opposite is true actually. And that is where planet-centric design comes into place. And I felt a little bit weird calling this a trend, because I certainly hope it will not become a trend, but it will become a standard. But it is something that I do want to call out, because I've heard some people talk about this, but this is still something that is very new to a lot of designers, especially to a lot of companies, because companies are still trying to figure out how to design user-centric. So how can they design planet-centric? That's already one step further even. So planet-centric design is a methodology for designing products and services that do not harm the planet. So their whole approach is that as designers, we should also be accountable for the work that we put out and how that impacts the environment. So we need to take that responsibility. And through planet-centric design, it's more like an approach rather than a product. It's more something like design thinking, or a way or a mindset of how to think about designing products. And I found thinking about my own work and finding ways on how can I design more planet-centric. Because if you work for a company like Zalando that sells clothing, we all know the impact that clothing has on the environment. So what can you as a designer do to keep that in mind and to be aware of all of that? Because even though I'm working on the app or I'm working on the website, it still means that actual people are buying jeans, and these jeans are being transported with DHL or with Hermes through the city. And it's very easy to forget about that because we're just sitting behind our computers and we're not really thinking about these things. So becoming aware of planet-centric design also helped me to critically think about what I am doing with my work, and to really think about, are there ways to for example, deliver products in a more sustainable way, or to have people return products in a more sustainable way? Or is there a way to help people make smarter buying decisions instead of just tempting them for impulse buys? So all of these things are things that I wasn't really aware of before, but reading up on planet-centric design made me really have a critical look on my own work and on my own approaches, and not just focus on conversion, but also think about what can we do that not only helps our customers, but also helps the planet a little bit. So planet-centric design gives the designers a methodology to keep that bird's eye perspective and to zoom out a little bit out of our own work, out of the user perspective, and really look at what is it that we're doing? How is it not only helping users, but how is it also helping or less harming the planet? So we should also think about beyond what serves the user. This is hopefully a trend and not a standard, and opposite to planet-centric design. And that is a changing job market. I think that is something that we have all become aware of in the past months, especially with all the mass layoffs that we have seen at Twitter, at Meta. Like have been a lot of big companies that first you would think offer a lot of stability, and then turn out that they are also laying off a lot of people. And understandably, that leads to maybe some panic or some frustration or some worry, especially when you are a new designer and you're trying to enter this market. You might probably have noticed how competitive things have become. And I think that is a harsh reality that a lot of designers face, not only entry-level designers, but just people working in tech in general. At the same time, it's also something that you have to learn how to navigate, because this is not the first recession ever. It will also not be the last recession. It will not be the first layoff round. It will also not be the last layoff round. So how do you navigate this job market? How do you navigate changes in a job market? And I think that especially if you're looking to get started in UX design, that is a very important question to ask yourself early on in your journey. So strategies that might have worked previously might not be so successful nowadays anymore. So speaking of my own experience, um, I am a CareerFoundry alumni. That's been already 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the job market was looking very different, especially for juniors. I was lucky enough to enter a market where there weren't that many juniors. There were a lot of open positions for juniors. So in that case, I had luck with timing. But how do you deal with that if you are facing a market where you have a lot of competition, where you have a lot of entry level designers that are looking at just a few job openings? And that's where I think it's important to think about, like, what are my possibilities? What are my ways that I can differentiate myself from other candidates? What can I do to sharpen certain skills? So, for example, I've seen in the past years that there was a strong focus on working at a big tech company. And that would leave a lot of people not interested in working, for example, in a smaller sized company or at a startup. And shifting this focus from working at Twitter or Google to working at a smaller company can actually broaden your chances. Like you can also be a really good designer if you don't work at a world company or at a company that everyone knows. In fact, those smaller companies can be a really good ground for you to grow. So that is the first thing that I would encourage people to do if they are now looking to break into the UX field, is to shift your focus on other industries that are tech layoffs. But as a UX designer, you do not always have to work in tech. You can also work in other industries. You can work at other companies. And what you will see right now is that skills are more important than ever. So I think that the expectation around the skills that entry level designers should have has been raised. There are no higher expectations, there are more expectations about what a junior designer should do. And on the one hand, that's a really good thing, because that means that people are realizing the value of design, and they're seeing, okay, this is an actual valuable thing for our company. But that also means that if you are in that position right now where you're at the start of your journey, that you also have to think about, how am I going to sharpen those skills? And it might feel very counterproductive, but I truly think that taking your time and not growing impatient, but really practicing your skills, looking into your previous work experience and thinking about, how can I leverage those skills? That is actually something that will make your job search in the future way easier. So, where in the past years it might have been enough to just do a boot camp or a course, create your portfolio, and then start applying for jobs, it might not be that easy nowadays anymore. You might need to take up extra personal projects. You might need to look into, how can I make these case studies? How can I turn them into something that feels more like me, or that can help set my portfolio apart from others? It might be helpful to think about, what are additional skills that I can add to my skill set. So if you're interested in AR and VR, how can you leverage that? If you are someone that is good at coding, how can you leverage that? If you are someone that loves collaborating with people and you're a real team player, maybe you can look into workshop facilitation. So there are still ways to strengthen your chances. It is a challenging market right now. That will also pass. It will not stay like this forever, but that is just the reality as it is right now. And I think there is no reason to panic, but there is reason to really have a good strategy about this and really think about, what skills do you have? What do you want to develop? And how are you planning to find a job? In what industry? We've done webinars on that before. We've done videos on that on the CareerFoundry channel, so you can look that up as well. But I think this is definitely one of these things that shape our field at this very moment. And let's see how things will look like in the next year. Then with that, the changing job market, there's also something else that we need to talk about, and that is just the changing internet landscape, the rise of Web3. Now, we've already been talking about this, I think, for a couple of years now. We've already seen companies come up with their own metaverse, with their own projects around Web3, but we've also seen some crashes, and especially in crypto in the past months. And a lot of people have maybe reservations about new technologies, about what all of this is. Is the metaverse really going to be a hit, or is it just a fad, a trend? Regardless of what your view on it is, I think as a designer working in this field, working as a digital designer, it's always good to at least have some interest, some knowledge about what is happening, because regardless if it's going to completely revolutionize the way that we work and the way that we enjoy the internet and connectivity, it will have some kind of impact. And that is what I want to talk about here, because when you look at Web3, you might think that Web3 just means you're going to design a purple app. There are a lot of Web3 aesthetics, so to say, that look very futuristic, that look very spacey. But Web3 is more than a fancy UI. It is an actual, it changes the way that we will be connected with each other. It changes the way that we will interact with our different devices. So digging deeper than UI and digging deeper than just the surface of how a Web3 app could look like is even more interesting to think about. What does that mean for the user experience? So what I see in our field is that there is a very strong focus on these different tools and gadgets, and on these different aesthetics, and on creating AR and VR filters and creating this fancy UI. But beyond that, there is not so much thought yet, or I've not seen it personally, about real use cases that we could apply in Web3, or real use cases for NFTs, for example, for blockchain technology. And that is something that is interesting to think about. So beyond all of these, the gadgets and the fancy things, what does Web3 really mean? And what does it mean for user experience design? I personally, but I'm not a Web3 designer, but out of my UX view, things that I'm really excited about in this particular area are questions like onboarding. How are we going to onboard people in using a blockchain? How are we going to explain that to people that are not so comfortable on the internet, or that did not grow up in this digital area? How can we work on connecting experiences across devices? So we are already used to designing for mobile, we're already used to designing for desktop, but what will happen if we also have to design for VR goggles and for a 3D dimension and not just a 2D dimension? How does that work? How does that feel like? How can we make a coherent experience there? So these are the things that, for me personally, sound very exciting, thinking about the different use cases. What could we use NFTs for? How would that look like? How do we get people to use these new technologies? How do we get people to understand the jargon also of all these new technologies? And as an anecdote, like I've used a crypto wallet app, and the app looks amazing. It looks super shiny, but the UX of it is absolutely horrendous. You cannot really find anything there. It's very hard to understand where your different coins are. And that is also something where, as a UX designer, I get very excited about, like, how can we create a wallet that is easy to use, that is understandable for people? especially if you have no knowledge about this. Like I have very, very limited knowledge about these things. So I'm a complete beginner. How can I create something that even someone like me could understand? And I think these are the things that, if you're looking, coming back to the previous trend, if you're looking for personal projects or for things to strengthen your portfolio, and this is something that interests you, that is actually a really good thing to think about and to sharpen your skill set in and to create projects with, because these are things that are becoming more and more relevant, especially if we're going to move more towards how does it not only look like, but also how does it work. So keeping your eyes open about new technologies that are happening and thinking about what are the skills that fit to these challenges that I see and what can I do to help these challenges. That's actually a really good way also to strengthen your position on the market. And if you're interested in Web3 and in new technologies, then this is a gold mine for you, because there are so many unsolved problems yet. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about a trend, although I'm not sure if it's a trend, it's more like an kind of like a mindset shift. And that is that I've seen new patterns and use cases arising. And I noticed this especially because last week I was taking the metro here in Berlin, and I saw advertisement for TikTok, but not the advertisement for TikTok as in here's a lot of entertainment, the advertisements that I've used to see in the past years, but there was an advertisement that was very specifically promoting TikTok as the new search engine. And I found this very, very interesting because it shows how we're without really realizing, learning new patterns and how we're coming up with new kind of behaviors and new kind of use cases. And I think TikTok is a really good example of this, where before we would go to TikTok and just consume these TikToks, these videos, learn maybe something. And slowly TikTok is turning into a search engine. You will see that they also add search recommendations. But if you are a TikTok user like I am, you might have already caught yourself using TikTok to look for something instead of using Google. And this I find very interesting, that social media platforms are taking over the use cases that we are used to seeing in other places. So instead of Googling something, you're now searching for it on TikTok. And if you look at Instagram, for example, it's the same. Like Instagram is also turning into a marketplace, not just a photo app anymore. It's coming up with new use cases, and those come with new kind of behaviors. And they just happen without really realizing it. And this is something that I find especially exciting if you're working as a UX designer, is trying to pause and really become aware of the behaviors that you have when you are interacting with different digital products, and really questioning yourself, what am I using this app for? What are the different use cases that I have for different apps? And then you will see that these apps are made in such a clever way that it just feels intuitive. You don't even question it anymore. And I always try to stay aware of these things, because now realizing, okay, you have people that use TikTok as a search engine, it's actually being advertised. What does that mean for Google, for example? Are younger generations going to use other kind of search engines than Google? Do they have different expectations about the information that they're searching for? How will that have an impact on very established patterns that we have? So going to Google to search for something instead of going to Yahoo or whatever. So I think that is something to definitely keep in mind, especially as younger generations. So Gen Z has a very different relationship towards the internet than someone like me, who is a millennial. So making sure that I design experiences that also feel intuitive and right for younger generations, not only older generations, is something that might slip my mind. But this advertisement last week really brought me back to that and thinking about, okay, what does all of this mean? Also, how do different generations experience the internet? Again, coming back to Web3, might feel very natural for us and for younger generations, but how are you going to explain a blockchain to your parents, for example? So becoming aware of these changes and the impact that they have on different generations, something that I find really exciting. And with that, we've gone through the 7 different trends. So as you saw, some of the things I hope are really just a trend, for example, the challenging job market for now. But there are also some things in there that I believe will have a longer lasting impact than just a temporary trend. I'm specifically thinking about, for example, planet-centric design. I think now that people are becoming more and more aware of the environmental impact that all of our lifestyles have, of course that needs to be translated to our practice as designers as well, and the approach that we have towards products. Before, it might have been really important for us to think about usability and about helping a company grow as a designer. And now, in addition to that, we also have the question, how are we going to do that in an ethical way or in a more environmental aware way? So these are the 7 trends that I have seen. I'm very curious what other trends you see. So I'm going to open the chat. I closed it so that I could focus on the presentation. But if there are any questions or comments or thoughts about this, I'm also very excited to hear. If there is something that you do not agree with at all, then we can start having a discussion. I love that. I see that we still have some 20 minutes left. So I'm going to hand it over to William. I'm sure that he has already selected some cool questions that we can use the last 20 minutes for to focus on that.
Hi, Maureen. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I was thinking actually when you were mentioning millennials and Gen Z that we should have done a poll and seen what the audience was this evening. Also, I wanted to just say one more thing. Amazed by how international the audience is this evening. Thank you all for joining. And if you've got any questions, now is the time to ask. So please do drop them into the Q&A. Maureen, I'll just kick it off. Thanks so much for presenting those 7 trends. Which one of those do you think is going to be the key one for 2023? Which one excites you the most?
So the one that I think will have the biggest impact in 2023 is the job market, because we already see that now, but I'm not sure if that's the most exciting one. The one that I find really exciting is the one that I shown last, about these different patterns emerging and these different use cases. And I'm just very excited in seeing now that you also see with a lot of platforms realizing that they need to re-engage customers or users, that they need to inspire users. How are they going to do that? What are the different use cases that they come up with? So that is something that really excites me. And I hope to see more of that in the next year.
Awesome. I'll jump into the chat then, and let's just start off with this question. Is it still worth actually learning UX design from scratch, considering that AI might take over?
Yes. The short answer to that is yes, because of course, this is my personal opinion, but I think if AI takes over your job, it's not the fault of the AI, it's the fault of your skill set. You have to have a critical look at your skill set. And there are still a lot of skills that AI is not equipped for right now. Like, we just see the very beginning of these tools. There is, for the next, it's not like our jobs are gone in the next years. That will take a long time, if ever. I don't believe it will ever happen. I do believe that our jobs will look different in a few years, but that is also something that very much excites me, that a career is ever changing, a role description is ever changing. And when you look back on UX design as we practice it now and before, things have also changed a lot. I see a lot of more experienced, older, traditional UX designers on LinkedIn that are very worried about the state of UX today, and that think back in the days everything was better. That's always how everyone thinks. Back in the days everything was better. So I definitely believe learning UX has still a value because it will only become more important, and AI will enhance it. It will not make us redundant. I don't believe that. If it will make you redundant, it's because of your skill set, not because the AI is that amazing.
So maybe you think it's like a kind of a change of mindset. So we have to see AI as like a friendly colleague that we want to meet and work with, as opposed to a colleague that wants to replace us.
That's how I definitely see it. Yes.
Awesome. And apologies if I pronounce anyone's name wrong. That's not intentional. I think Nikolai has got a great question. In your experience, what are some common mistakes or pitfalls that UX designers should be careful to avoid when implementing these trends or the latest trends?
I think it's always good to be aware of trends, but use them with sense. So just because something is new and shiny doesn't mean that we have to use it. Sometimes you can solve things in the old way. So why would you then use a new way? An example of this is at some point everyone wanted to have an app for everything. And I worked in an agency, and oftentimes we had clients that wanted an app because everyone has an app. But sometimes having an app is not the best way to solve the customer needs or the business issues or challenges that they were facing. So see these trends as tools that you can pick if it makes sense for your use case. Coming back to the apps, in some cases it was more useful to make a website or to make a web app. And I think it's the same with these trends. So for example, now that we have a blockchain, it doesn't mean that everything has to be on the blockchain. You have to think about when does it make sense, and sometimes old tools also work perfectly. It doesn't mean that all of these things are not useful anymore.
Fantastic. Rachel's asking, how do you see Chat GPT impacting search engines?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I'm not so sure about search engines. I guess, yeah, you can get the answer, but I think the benefit with search engines is that you see where it comes from. Like you still see the source of where this information is coming from. So I think with Chat GPA, I'm more thinking of it in terms of like content. What impact does that have on content design and on writing? If it can pull from a lot of different sources that we cannot look into, a lot of data sets that we don't have transparency on, to create a very convincing text. So I'm not so sure with search engines. That's where my knowledge is also way too limited to really have a good answer on this. But I think more in terms of content design, that is exciting, because with search engines, you still have that idea of, okay, when I'm Googling something, I can see where this information is coming from. And so I can also estimate if I find this information reliable or not.
Awesome, thanks. I know this evening lots of people are watching because they're thinking about taking those first steps into UX design, maybe even considering taking CareerFoundry's UX design program. If we're looking at skills for a UX designer and also answering one question that's come through, what kind of skills or what kind of skill set do we need to focus on the most in 2023 in relation to UX design?
What I found starting out as a UX designer is that still the basic understanding of what are the different UX methods, what are the different UX tools that we use. First, try to master that, because that's your foundation. So what you will learn in the CareerFoundry course, also like going through this design thinking process, is really helpful to have a strong foundation. On top of that, what I found really, really helpful when I started working were two things. One, understanding how products are built. So understanding in a company, how do they actually build a product? What they use, product development processes, like what does agile mean, or what does scrum mean? You will hear these things if you're working with developers. The way that developers work is different than the way that designers work. So understanding how a product is actually built in real life, that is very useful, and that is something that you can start looking into. And the second thing that was proven to be very useful for me is start establishing or sharpening your soft skills. So, how can you clearly communicate with your other non design colleagues? How can you present your ideas to stakeholders? How can you nurture positive collaboration? So, especially when you notice that you're working together with people that might be a bit skeptical of design, or they don't know what UX design is, how are you going to deal with that? So, I would start with the foundation that you will learn in the course. And on top of that, think about how a product's built and how can I communicate my skills in a clear way.
And that's also really interesting, because I know that a lot of students that do the CareerFoundry programs have previous professional experience, or have studied beforehand. And one question that comes in is, how am I going to start a new career in UX design when I don't know anything about UX design? But one thing that some people forget is that actually you're bringing a lot of soft skills from previous positions or studies with you, those presentation skills, communication skills, working in a team that maybe you just don't realize how to sell as much as, and they're also super important. So that was a really interesting point. Another question that's come through, and I think it's very relevant at the moment, especially in light of some of the recent climate change conferences, but how do you prioritize planet-centric design if it might go against business priorities, like your clothing company, for example, if being environmentally friendly means less purchases?
That is that is actually funny, because that's the very question that I'm asking in my work right now. I think these are short and long-term thinking. So it is very challenging for designers to establish these long-term strategies, where indeed it might not be about how can we sell more jeans, but how can we help people make well thought out decisions, even if that means they're not buying more jeans. And I think that's where you'll have to look at it per company. I cannot talk for every company, but for Zalando, it's definitely something that is a part of our work, is thinking about, okay, how can we help people make more sustainable choices, because we know it will help them in the long term. And that again benefits the company, because you want to keep customers. So I can imagine that pushing a more planet-centric strategy or approach is really difficult, especially when you're working together, or when you're working in a company where user-centric design is not even a thing. So how are you going to start talking about the planet then? But these are also things that you can keep in the back of your mind when you're working on a concept. Question yourself on this. What can you do to make to add more sustainable choices into your designs? How can you think more about relieving the infrastructure that is used in a city? For example, now I'm just talking about like e-commerce, a very example, because that's I work in e-commerce. But I think in general, thinking about what can I as a designer do, and how can I explain the long-term benefit of this, and how can I explain how this fits into the strategy of a company. So that also means you have to understand what are these company strategies. And then you will find that also for a company, in the long term, it's always beneficial for them. You just have to find a way to communicate that, and you do that by telling them, hey, these are the business challenges, this is the strategy, where can we find a balance between these two?
Definitely. I know there are some really interesting companies, going back to the integrating that kind of like profit and also environmentalism. Some have like a cradle to cradle or do triple bottom line accounting where they also account for environmental impacts too. But as you said, Maureen, definitely is to do with the communication, also the storytelling and how you get that message across. But thanks for that question. I think that's super relevant. And I think that also just goes to show just how many different avenues you can take UX design down. It really is, as a starting point, there are so many end places that you can end up, or interesting, exciting projects that you can end up doing. So, start out and see where that journey is going to take you. Maria's asking a question which isn't about trends, but maybe you've got some insights too. What are the best tools for UX design?
That really depends on in what stage of the process you're in. So I personally still always start my concepts and wireframes just with pen and paper, no fancy tools. So when it comes to wireframing, my answer is pen and paper, but it depends if you want to work on prototypes. My favorite tool is Figma. I find it hard to say what are the best tools because there is no such thing as a best tool. The best tool is the one that helps you get the message across in the best way. For example, I would love to use Figma for everything because I enjoy using Figma as a designer. However, I know that in my company, we have a lot of different colleagues. Not everyone has Figma. So sometimes it makes more sense for me to create a presentation in Google Slides or to create a spreadsheet instead of a beautiful customer journey in Figma, because I know that my colleagues have an easier time accessing the information through a presentation or through a spreadsheet than through Figma because they don't have an account. So in that sense, Google Slides is then the best tool. So I think it's always good to think about who needs to have this information, what access to tools do they have, and what's the best tool to bring that message across. And then you'll come to the conclusion that every tool has benefits and downsides, and it just depends on what you want to tell.
Fantastic, thanks. Another question coming through is, will new use cases eventually turn current apps into super apps, or do you believe apps like Grab will make it global before this happens?
Oh my, that sounds dystopian to me. So I hope that there will not be some monopoly where Grab has everything. I do think you can already see this, that apps are trying to keep people in their own ecosystem. And it doesn't have to be a super app like Grab. For example, Instagram is already trying to keep people in their own ecosystem by offering you to buy the products that are advertised to you on Instagram through the Instagram marketplace. So I do think that we will see more and more of that. For example, when you use Klarna, you can also already see like the brands that they have in their app. You don't even need to go to the Nike store anymore. So I do think that you will see more and more tendencies of companies keeping the people in their own ecosystem and not giving it to the competitor. If that means that there will only be super apps and in the end there will only be one super app, I don't hope so. I don't know, but I don't hope so.
Imagine how clean the phone would be if there was only one app just to open and that's it.
Yeah, or extremely bloated, right? With a lot of different functionalities.
True. Or the VR headset. I don't know. Maybe go into the app with the VR headset on. Anyway, we're digressing. We've been talking a lot about trends, and one question that's come in over on YouTube is, how do we actually stay ahead of all of these trends? What's a good place to look for resources? How do we stay up to date with the industry when we're working in UX design?
This is gonna sound really stupid, but by reading the news, like the most of the shifts that I see is by keeping your eyes open, reading the news, looking around you when you're outside. What are the changes that you're seeing? What are the things that you hear people talk about? And how can you translate that? So that's what I also meant with this TikTok advertisement that I saw. that prompted me to think about, oh, okay, so TikTok is now presenting itself as a search engine. What does that mean for our field? And the same as with the news. If you hear that Meta is laying off a lot of people, what does that mean for our field? So I think inspiration and foresight on our field can happen anywhere. But if you want to have very concrete resources, I really like to read Fast Company. I really like to read Wired, Harvard Business Review. You have Vox is called, or no, The Verge, sorry. So these are websites that keep you up to date with like technological developments. But for me personally, the best inspiration and understanding comes from talking with people, looking around, being aware of the news, this is gonna sound also ridiculous, but like going for a walk in your city, seeing how the city is changing. What does that have as an impact on your field? You can get inspiration also offline. I think that's a really important source actually of inspiration.
I think the CareerFoundry video team would argue CareerFoundry's YouTube channel, but I'll just shamelessly plug that too. So do check that out. And lastly, during the CareerFoundry UX design program, the key takeaway, and you know this yourself, Maureen, because you've done the program, is the portfolio. So this is what you present to employers, and this is what eventually lands you your job, because you can talk through the projects that you've been working on. Do you think this is something which is set to continue, the importance of a portfolio in landing jobs in the UX design industry?
Yeah, it's funny, we always get portfolio questions, which I also totally understand. I think that portfolios will continue to be an important element to get a job, even though I hear more and more critical voices of designers against portfolios, or they are fed up with the complex hiring processes and that you need a portfolio and that you need to do all of these challenges. And I do agree that this hiring process can be improved. But the reality is that a lot of companies still want to see a portfolio, and I think it's still an important element. But I do think a portfolio should be treated like the result of all the time that you invested in practicing your skills and in doing these different projects and learning out of them and reflecting on what are the challenges that you saw, what are the things that you took from it. Whereas a lot of people treat a portfolio as something that you have to finish as soon as possible so that you can start applying for a job. And so they run through these case studies without really thinking about what does this mean. So a portfolio should be the result of all the practice that you've put in up front. It's not important that you know what a user persona is, because everyone knows what a user persona is. It's important that you know, why do you use it? When do you use it? Are there alternatives to a user persona that might make more sense in some cases? So learning to apply the different methods, and as a result of that, creating a portfolio is way more useful than learning as many methods as you can and putting them in your portfolio. Then the portfolio will probably not have a lot of use.
Awesome. Thanks, Maureen, for not just for the answer to that question, but also for presenting this evening. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, this is CareerFoundry's last event of the year. So thank you for everybody who's joined us throughout the year. Thank you for all the audience this evening and the great questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't answer all of them, but I will be sending around a recording tomorrow in an email with some links, also linking to CareerFoundry's blog too, and CareerFoundry's YouTube channel. Do check that out, and also please do check out CareerFoundry's events page. We've got a lot of exciting events coming up in 2023 with some familiar faces, but also lots of different collaborations with YouTubers and guests throughout the tech industry, and we are super happy to feature everybody, and we'd love to see you there. Maureen, thank you so much for presenting this evening. Let's see which trends develop and which ones maybe fizzle out, and maybe we can do a recap at the end of next year about the year ahead. And one thing I would say just before we go is that currently CareerFoundry is offering a tuition reduction for the UX design program, worth up to $1,285 or 1,120 euros off of the UX design program. If you wait after the webinar, you'll be redirected to a booking page where you can book a call with a program advisor. Program advisors are there to answer any questions that you might have about CareerFoundry's curriculum, jobs in your locality, what exactly is a portfolio, our dual mentorship model, basically all the kind of smaller questions about CareerFoundry's career change programs. And yeah, so do stay on. And if you want to book a call with them, do that. And that's all from us for this year. That's it. We're over. It's over.
Thank you so much. Yeah, looking forward to a recap next year if we still have jobs. If AI has taken over, then the AI can do the presentation next year.
This is a very dystopian way to leave. I hope, but you never know. It's 12 months. Anything can happen. But we hope
exactly.
We hope that we're still going to be here next year.
We'll see what plot twist 2023 will have for us.
Hopefully none more. Hopefully none more. But Maureen, thanks so much. Good luck with the move, and thank you for everybody in the audience. And we'll see you all next year.
Happy holidays, everyone. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays. Let me just see if I can end this. And